Hello and welcome to the third and final episode of In Conversation with P&G Beauty, Diversity Beyond Numbers mini-series. Across the media landscape, LGBTQ inclusion is expanding every day, but not in advertising. A 2020 report by Geena Davis Institute on gender in media found only 1.8% of characters in ads from the annual Cannes Lion Festival were LGBTQ. This month, with the help of my panel, we will discuss the cultural drivers that can help brands increase LGBTQ representation across all marketing activity. Without further ado, let me introduce the panel. A warm welcome to Sarah Kate Ellis, President and CEO of GLAAD, Brent Miller, Senior Director, Global LGBTQ+, Equality, Creative Content and Partnerships at P&G, and Layal Amer, VP Hair Care Portfolio Europe at P&G. Welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
It's great to be with you guys.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Sarah, let's start with you. In 2021, what are the key social drivers influencing the need for brands to increase LGBTQ representation in advertising campaigns?
Well, I think you really mentioned it in your opening, right? Is that there's only 1.8% of ads that include LGBTQ people. But if you look at the latest Gallup poll in the United States, that showcases that 18 to 24-year-olds, 16% identify as LGBT. And we measure the Q as well at GLAAD. So when you add the Q, that percentage nearly doubles. So if you have this younger generation that is highly identifying within the LGBTQ community, and you need to see if you're a business out there, right? In the beauty business is at the leading edge, right? Has always been. They need to start including LGBTQ people more and more. Now, I do think the beauty industry has done a pretty good job at it, better than other industries overall. But it's really, if you want to attract as a company the next generation of employees and the next set of talent within your own corporation, but also the next generation of consumers. If almost 30% of this population is identifying as LGBTQ, and you know from research and time again in advertising that people want to see themselves reflected, they actually want to see a better version of themselves reflected, right? So I think that's really, really important, and that's to the point of the research that we've been doing with P&G over the past couple of years.
And what are the key social drivers for P&G, Brent?
Well, I mean, I think we're seeing a pretty big shift in the marketplace. And to Sarah Kate's point, with each successive generation, we're seeing more and more people identify as LGBTQ. There's a lot of different factors that are playing into that. Part of that is, I think, the expansiveness of the community itself and the changing definition of what it means to be LGBTQ. But certainly more and more people are comfortable identifying, coming out of the closet, living openly and honestly as their authentic selves. And so there's a social dynamic here. And as a company that really serves all people, we have a responsibility and an obligation to represent all of those people in the work that we do. And, you know, personally, as someone that's part of the LGBTQ community, as I grew up, I didn't see myself represented in advertising. I didn't really see a world where I belonged. And the simple act of including the community within advertising is a signal that you matter, that you're important, that you're valued. And as a company, we have a voice, and that voice has an impact on how people see the world, how they see each other, how they see relationships and kind of interactions between people. And when we can commit ourselves to the authentic and accurate portrayal of communities like the LGBTQ community, we can have a really profound impact on not only just normalization of different people in our society, but better understanding. So I think as we continue to see the dynamics shift and expand for the LGBTQ community, the business community needs to be on board with that representation and commit themselves to doing that accurately and authentically.
And how does this impact product development, Lael?
So that's a great question. And building on what my two colleagues were saying, first of all, if we just step back and, and sorry for the number overload, I think a lot of you are going to give, a lot of us are going to give you some percentages, but today more and more consumers are not necessarily only looking at the benefits they're buying, but they're looking at the values of the brands that they're buying. And actually, if you talk to Gen Z consumers, 68% of them believe brands need to promote more progressive values and they need to play a more meaningful role in society. And, to what my two colleagues were saying, more and more people today are embracing their authenticity in an unapologetic way, be it ethnicity, culture, gender expression, age, and other aspects of their identity. But yet, to your starting point, only 1.8% of advertising is reflecting that reality. And if we think, in the broader workplace, 53% of LGBTQ plus community members feel they have to hide their identity at work, which is where they spend most of their life. So there is that massive difference between the expectation of consumers and the reality. And at the heart of it, I think there's a lot of fear from brands necessarily thinking that they may get it wrong, thinking they may not get the right representation. And that fear tends to hold a lot of brands back from just taking that first step forward. And if I think of our experience on Pantene, which is one of the brands that has been leading the frontier with the Hair Has No Gender campaign, it really started with a deep human insight. And that insight was that hair is identity. And that was true for members of the LGBTQ plus community as well as other communities. But the thing that we found out is that while, for me as a straight woman, going and getting the hair that I want and the way that I want and, delivering my identity in the way that I feel right was something I've taken for granted. It wasn't absolutely the case for members of the transgender community. And there were no safe spaces for them to demonstrate their identity. And actually, salons didn't necessarily accept them. The men's salon would give a certain look, the women's salon would give a certain look, and that was a very binary way of expressing hair. And so once we found that out as a brand, we took that first step forward of partnering with the right people and driving that right representation and making a change in society that we feel very proud of. But that's just the first step of many. And I think, even those earlier days, there was some fear. I'm not gonna lie about it of, how do we do this? Are we doing this right or wrong? Are we actually driving the right representation? And I think that, the more we overcome that fear collectively, the more we're able to actually drive culture forward.
Sarah, what does GLAAD believe are the key digital drivers assisting brands to increase LGBTQ representation in advertising campaigns?
Well, if you're going to engage with the LGBTQ community, especially the youth or the younger generation, like we are talking about today, you need to leverage social media to reach us, right? LGBTQ influencers and social media talent have such fierce and engaged followers. And social media has been a lifeline for our community. It's where we've met each other. It's where we've been able to meet in a safe space. And it's also where we've been able to organize. Over the years, interestingly enough, though, it has also become a weapon against us as a community. So that is something that we are, as a media advocacy organization, we just launched a social media safety index measuring the 5 big platforms for safety. But I got carried away there. This is about beautiful things and beauty. But I think that how many LGBTQ people have shared their transformational, and when I say transformational, I mean physical and emotional transformation and finding their true and authentic self on YouTube, or how many LGBTQ beauty bloggers there. It's such a popular and powerful segment of our community. And it has helped. It's also a place where youth go to find like-minded people or people who they feel that they can connect with. There's also LGBTQ media online, like the Advocate, Out, and Condé Nast brand, Them. It's called Them. Those are important ways for beauty advertisers also to reach our community and to support our community, because as we see the media industry changing rapidly and niche publications starting to dissipate, it's so important to support LGBTQ media, because it's not just a niche audience. It also is a way for us as a marginalized community to get information and news about our community. But I think you cannot embrace our community without embracing social media and social media platforms. And it's a wonderful way for brands to connect with our community. But it's also, as I said, there's good and bad here, because it has also been weaponized for us. We're the most censored people, and we're the most bullied people on social media. So it's a double-edged sword, as they say.
What are the key digital drivers for P&G, Brent?
Well, I mean, Sarah Kate is, spot on, and this is just it's really the main platform that we use in order to reach the community. And I think what's been particularly interesting is because of the two-way conversation that occurs in social and digital media, it allows really robust conversation to occur between the consumers or the people seeing the content that we're putting out there and the brands. And sometimes those conversations are very positive and heartwarming and affirming for people, and sometimes they can be quite negative for people that aren't necessarily supportive of the LGBTQ community. But what is kind of wonderful about the platform is that it creates dialogue. A lot of times those conversations can self-police as people express their own points of view. And I think what's critically important as we are putting out content is that we recognize the power that it has to create conversation. And it's those conversations which ultimately help us lead to better understanding. And it's that dimension of responsibility that becomes then so critical to make sure that we get it right. To Lyle's point, when she talked about the Pantene campaign, the Hair Has No Gender campaign, where we were representing a host of different transgender women in their journey with their hair. It's so important that we really nail that representation of that journey and the experience of transgender women, because it puts that conversation into a social environment. And when that representation is correct, then we can really start something that can be very dynamic. And it helps people that may not identify as part of the community understand the community better, or they can see parts of themselves in the insights that we're bringing forward. And so it's just an incredibly dynamic forum. And then also to Sarah Kate's point, though, is we have to be very careful about the safety that's associated with it. And so, we monitor that very closely. We make sure that the conversations that are happening are responsible, or as responsible as they can be. We make sure that the people that choose to share their stories with us in our ads and in our content are protected, because there is a degree of vulnerability that's associated with social and digital media. So, we do everything that we can in order to foster great dialogue. And then, certainly working with different influencers and different stakeholders that can help facilitate those conversations is really helpful to put some great guardrails up or help guide that conversation in a responsible way. But I think, most importantly is social media helps give the community a visibility. And it's a place where people are coming together and they're finding people like them. They're finding, a degree of camaraderie. So if you're a young person in a rural environment that has, perhaps a very small LGBT community or a non-visible LGBT community, you go online and you go into a social environment and you can find people like yourself. And that's incredibly empowering, because that's when you know that you're not alone. And so the dynamicism that it brings to brands and it brings to companies in the world of conversation is just really unending.
And how do the digital drivers affect brand development, Lael?
So I think my colleagues have said it really well. If I step back a second, you know, digital technology has absolutely given a voice and platform to those that may have not had it before. And one of the things that we talk about often is it has changed the visual diet that we consume. If we think of visual diets in the past, it was really a one-way conversation. You know, we as brands used to put visual diets out, publishers used to put visual diets out, and that became what everyone consumed. But when we think of the digital platform, and to a lot of the, you know, the comments from my colleagues, people are creating the content themselves. And hence we are in a world where that visual diet we consume is so much more representative, and is so much more enriching of the reality that we live. At the same time, it has also been a space where hate has been expressed probably, you know, more freely, and members of a community that already feel marginalized become under attack, and that can be detrimental for mental health and for, you know, the goal of moving forward. But I always say that that absolutely shouldn't hinder us, because if, you know, the positives that come out of being on platforms and driving that conversation forward and being a positive force of change and a force for good far outweigh the negatives, and we just need to be conscious of that. We need to get more educated, partner with the right people, ask the right questions, get involved in the conversations, and then keep pushing forward with driving conversations and putting content out there that actually is thought provoking and gets people to connect at a human level, and sees, you know, beyond the differences that we may, you know, use via labels. So I don't think we can move forward in society and culture without embracing everything that the digital platforms have to offer, recognizing that there is a negative part of it that we need to be, you know, cognizant of, but work through and not let that be a barrier for progress.
Talking about progress, Sarah, which environmental drivers are impacting the need for brands to increase LGBTQ representation in advertising?
So I think when you look at what I was talking about earlier about the growing demographic that identify as LGBTQ, that it becomes obvious that we need to service this community at a different level in a different way. I also think that one of the important things about operationalizing an environment, I always talk about this, and Brent knows because we have so many conversations about this, is that, you know, as companies are using their advertising to speak to the LGBTQ community, and especially here we are in Pride Month, right? So happy Pride, everyone. But in addition, what we're seeing is a lot of brands stepping up with rainbow flags and t-shirts and all sorts of merchandise. But what's really important, and one thing that a lot of other companies can take a page from P&G on, is getting your house in order. The operationalizing of DE&I, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, or making sure that marginalized communities are seen, heard, and accepted within your own company, is just step one, honestly. Like, you have to start there. That's baseline. If you're not treating your employees well, how can you then go market to communities? So I think operationalizing and creating an environment within your own company that's a culture that's accepting, and policies that recognize LGBTQ people with disabilities, whoever the marginalized community is, that often isn't thought of when policies are being written up, is taken into consideration. And that's the only way, as we were all saying earlier, right? That if you don't create an environment of inclusion and acceptance, then you're not going to attract the next generation of creators and employees.
And for P&G, Brent?
Well, I mean, to Sarah Kate's point, the environment has been, you know, changing for some time, and I think over the last 5 years or so, we've seen more and more brands want to be more inclusive of the LGBT community in their advertising. One of the key questions that we always get is, how do we do that, and how do we do that well? And so what we are working on with a lot of our teams is growing the capability to better represent the community. And it's a tough challenge because the community is so incredibly diverse. Within LGBTQ, you really have every walk of life. You have every gender, age, ethnicity, race, religion, etc., reflected. And so for us, as the environment outside of the company becomes more accepting and more appreciative of the LGBTQ community, that makes our job even more important. And we need to make sure that we are kind of stepping up to that challenge in the way that we reflect the community in our own work. And, I think Sarah Kate makes a great point about, ensuring that we have our own house in order. And that's through policies and, different things that we need to be building inside the company that helps to nurture and develop talent. And so all of those factors kind of are kind of coming into just a really interesting moment in time where the craft of LGBTQ marketing is accelerating extremely rapidly. And we now are faced with the really wonderful challenge of how to embrace that and how to do that craft very, very well. And I think what's been fascinating is with the beauty industry, they're really one of the very first industries that embrace the LGBTQ community. And so they've been doing this and kind of evolving in the space for a while. And so I think we can learn from a lot of companies that have been pioneering in the space. And I expect that, more and more companies are going to be able to be bringing, LGBTQ people and themes and insights into the work that they're doing.
I think also one of the things, Brent, is that our research together showed, so GLAAD and P&G released research on advertising and marketing executives, and it really drives home what Brent was saying, which is that 81% of advertisers say they are worried about backlash if they include LGBTQ people in, not from the general public, but from the LGBTQ community. Because they're concerned that the who they include won't be perceived as authentic enough. And the reason they feel this is because these there are so many identities that they're unfamiliar with, and they don't understand the nuances of them. And that's really a big threshold that we've crossed, actually, where in the past, what we were concerned as advertisers was, will there be a general population backlash if I include a gay couple in my ad? And that was really what we were up against as GLAAD. We were helping brands who were willing to go out there. Now it's the inverse. It's actually flipped. We're not worried about, advertisers aren't so worried about the general population because it's pretty widely accepted LGBTQ. What they are worried is the backlash from the community itself, because they're not getting the nuanced portrayals correct. And that's someplace like Brent and I spend a lot of time on, and our team spend a lot of time on when P&G is including LGBTQ people in the ads. And that's something that we can help with through the visibility project that we launched together, and that any brands can go and sign up to be a part of the visibility project, where we will help you and advise you on how to do it, especially the nuance when you get into transgender or gender nonconforming identities, and how to do that in a real and authentic and accurate way.
And talking nuance, Leal, how does it impact brand development?
So, I'm going to take it back to, I think, brands ultimately are part of what we do every day at P&G. And I think it starts with what we do back home. And I love the way that you said it, getting the shop back in order. And I want to start there because I think that you can only develop brands that are more inclusive if you start with a home that is more inclusive. Recently we saw that 53% of LGBTQ plus people are not feeling themselves at work. That means that there's a lot to be done. And there's a lot of information about the role of not just equality in the workplace, but equity, to ensure that we're all starting from that same base. And it starts with having teams that are actually creating environments that are inclusive. But to do that, you need to understand the barriers and the biases that we have, and then acting on them. I give you a small example. A few years ago, one of my team members, who was instrumental in the work that we did on the Pantene Hair Has No Gender campaign, he is gay and he was becoming a parent. And what we realized at the time was we had a paternity leave, which was 2 months, and we had a maternity leave, which was 4 months. And we didn't necessarily have a policy that fit his situation. And hence, we needed to do something about it. And our incredible HR team at the time partnered and we changed the policy. And being part of a team like that and being part of a home like that breeds work that then comes into the brands and is able to impact society at large. So I do think that we need to as companies do both. Think of the brands that we're putting out there, but then where are those brands being developed? What are the teams we are building around those brands? And are we fostering that kind of inclusive behavior that then breeds advertising that is more representative? And it's key that we have allies as we're doing that, both internally and externally, to make sure that we're making that change inside out, which I think makes it even more powerful.
And talking allies, Sarah, what are the governmental drivers aiding or abetting the need for brands to increase LGBTQ representation in advertising?
So, yeah, I think that's a great question, because when we talk about authenticity from brands, we can't do that without saying that brands need to take a stand, right, for LGBTQ people when it comes to laws that harm us or ones that will write LGBTQ equality and acceptance into law. So both for and against. Brands helped us and stepped up when we were fighting for marriage equality in the United States. And they continue to help us on the state level in the United States, where we've seen over 250 anti-LGBTQ bills presented this past year. And over 100 of those are just straight out anti-trans bills. When you look at the world at large, nearly 70 countries still criminalize LGBTQ. And there are only about, 30 countries where marriage equality is legal. So we have a long way to go, and brands can use their leverage, their power, both with governments and their buying power, their advertising power, their platforms, to help move forward true equality and acceptance for the LGBTQ community. And I think, I often say, when you market to the LGBTQ community, you need to be ready to join our movement, because you can't just sell us product. You have to help us as a marginalized community. And I think there's a lot of power that we've seen harnessed around governments and corporations in order to advance acceptance and equality across the world.
And does that resonate with you, Brent?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, the laws and the actions of our governments and our governing bodies have a direct impact on the environments in which we're doing business. And of course, our employees are members of the communities that are impacted by the laws that allow them to come and be their full selves. And so we want to make sure that our communities are as inclusive as possible and are as open as possible, so that our people can bring their full selves to work. That increases productivity, that increases creativity. And then in addition, we know that more inclusive communities have more expansive economies, because more people are operating as their full selves. So these inclusive economies are good for business. They're good for our employees, and it's fostering a community that people want to be a part of. So it's important for us to work within our local markets where we're at to help drive inclusive policy, just as we would inside the company. So, it can be very tricky because there's a huge amount of difference around the world in terms of religious norms, societal norms, cultural norms that have differing impacts on the LGBTQ community. But we know through partnerships with people like GLAAD, through organizations like PGLE, and other organizations, that we can engage in conversation, which ultimately, in the long run, was going to have a positive effect.
And how does this affect brand development, Lael?
So, I mean, I in line with what was said, it is our absolute privilege, but also responsibility as brands to move culture forward. You know, when you are working on some of the world's largest beauty brands, when you are, driving this much media, when you literally shape culture, it becomes part of your responsibility, and it's a responsibility we don't take lightly. I think a lot of what Brent was saying is we take that responsibility to heart. We realize that we operate pretty much all over the world, and have a responsibility to move culture forward, to partner with the right partners across the world, and to be part of that conversation, and at many times lead that conversation forward. So I start off with what I said at the very beginning of the podcast, which is there is no more brand building that is just about delivering a benefit. Our consumers are expecting brands to have values and to demonstrate those values and to be part of change and to drive the culture. And there is no more, I buy you because you deliver X, Y, and Z, but I expect of you that you impact society. And so for me, really, it's not a if, it's a must as a brand builder nowadays to embrace the important topics and to have a role and a responsibility in driving those forward.
To build on that from in terms of the brand perspective, because there are so many differences around the world, not just in terms of laws, but just in terms of cultural acceptance and the diversity within the LGBTQ community, it does impact at times how we execute a campaign or how we represent the LGBTQ campaign. And it's really important for us as brands and companies to understand the nuances within all of those different markets, because you can go in with the best of intention and driving a conversation forward on this community. And if you're not in touch with that nuance, or you don't understand some of the cultural dynamics in some of these markets around the world, your good intentions may have the reverse impact that you want it to have. And so we work with organizations like GLAAD. So when we're creating a new campaign that has an LGBTQ theme or idea or representation, we want to make sure that that has resonance and relevancy with the community. And we work really hard to make sure that we get it right so that our good intention comes through and that message is received by the public in the way it's intended. And that's just a tricky nuance that is probably more present with the LGBT community than potentially other underrepresented groups. And it's something that is just really important for brand builders to understand as they go into this area of marketing and brand building.
That's really well said. That's really well said. And I don't think you will never see the same campaign everywhere in the world because of those differences. And maybe sometimes you may judge that a campaign didn't go far enough somewhere, looking at it from a different lens. But the reality is it could be that that's going quite far in that context. And so that's absolutely the right build, Brent. And again, I think we have the luxury of having that footprint and working with all the right partners to enable us to get that nuance. And we certainly do get it wrong at times. I mean, I don't want to also, sit here and say that we always get it right. We have gotten it wrong in places, and it's important that you then pivot, recognize you got it wrong, but then you don't let that stop you. You just pivot, you get it right again, and then you move forward.
And shaping culture, Sarah, what should brands do to increase LGBTQ representation in advertising over the next 12 months?
Well, I think they should definitely join the P&G and GLAAD Visibility Project, and you can go to GLAAD.org to do that, GLAAD.org, which is a commitment to increasing representation and also gives you the tools to do it the right way, so that you are so that you're not putting yourself in a or your company at risk, or representing the community. So I think what you're all saying though is so right. It's like you've got to take the step forward, and taking a page from P&G, which is, when I say get your house in order, it doesn't need to be perfect. It's about progress, folks. It's not about being perfect. We're not perfect. And it's really important that, you don't have to be, have everything perfectly aligned in your organization, your board represented, your executive team. There are goals, and you should be working toward those goals before you go, while you're going out to the community. So, I don't want people to stall their efforts in a public way, because in a private way, they're trying to still get their company up to speed. I think that you have to do them concurrently. And I think P&G showed a great example about that. And the same to what was just being said, which is like, when you do make a mistake, when you are off, just acknowledge that, P&G did a whole movie about what LGBTQ inclusion or lack of inclusion looked like at the company for years. And it's owning your narrative is the most powerful way to overcoming it, right? Especially if there's something that you're trying to overcome, obviously. So I think that's something that I want to leave people with, is that please visit GLAAD.org and join the Visibility Project. I think we're really looking forward to working with brands to be inclusive, but also don't stop yourself. Think and be thoughtful about it, but don't think that you have to achieve perfection within your company in order to move forward externally. You need to be working at it, and you have to have really good intentions and thoughtful people around you. And please call us to help you.
And for P&G, Brent?
I think this has probably been the most exciting time for LGBTQ brand building that I've been able to be a part of, because what we're seeing now is a lot more tools available to us to really go in and do the homework. And that first step of doing the homework is absolutely critical for brands to enter into this space and do it in a sustained way. We always talk about this type of work and saying it needs to be baked in to the fabric of how we build brands, and it's not a bolted on effort. To Sarah Kate's point earlier about what we see right now during Pride Month, where a lot of brands are coming out with limited edition products with rainbows and all those different things, like that's great, right? That can create visibility, and for a young person to come and see a sea of rainbows everywhere, it feels good. It feels nice to think like, wow, there's a lot of support out there. But as brand builders, we've got to make sure that is a sustained idea that's baked into how we build our brands. And it starts with getting in and doing the research with the consumer, getting in and doing the homework, and figuring out how that ladders up to the brand strategy. So that's really what we're doing with a lot of our brands now. I like to use Pantene as an example. I mean, they went in and did the research and discovered that 60% of people change their hair when they come out of the closet. And that insight, ladders up to the idea that hair is one of the most visible ways that people present themselves to the world, that they present their identity to the world. And once Pantene, really ran with that insight, then they had a conversation point that was relevant to hair, relative to the brand, relative to the LGBTQ community, that was workable in a campaign that made sense. It made sense that Pantene was talking about this. And that's when you come up with something that can be sustained over time. So that's what we're working to do now over the next 12 months, is dig in, do our homework, and make sure that we're building the right brand systems that are going to be able to sustain LGBTQ representation throughout everything that we do.
And for you, Leal?
So, Brent and I were having a conversation a few weeks back, and we were thinking of the fact that a lot of us after this lockdown were really excited to go back out, go back into life and what have you. And then we reflected on the fact that there was there were a lot of members of the community that actually felt that they may need to go back into the closet in a way, need to go back into norms, need to go back into hiding their identity, need to go back into certain stereotypes of what they're supposed to look like at work or in their day-to-day lives. So I want us to first pause and reflect on the fact that there are still many consumers and members of the community that today do not feel that they could absolutely be and exist in a way that fully represents their identity. And that is something that we should not be accepting in 2021. So there's an urgency to act and to act fast. And then it goes back to what do we do as brands? And I, not to repeat what Brent was saying, but I think there's, if I put it into 4 things: A, get educated, do your homework, your brands really well. Make sure that you find that insight that is coherent to the brand benefit and is at the heart of the brand expression. So, I love that a lot of people are putting, unicorns everywhere, et cetera, but that's not necessarily getting the homework done. So let's get the homework done. And I think as a company, we're very committed to doing that. Then find the right partners. GLAAD is an incredible partner. Find those right partners that help you get educated as well and help create the bridges that you may not have and the nuances that you may miss. Then take that step forward. And I couldn't emphasize that more. But then learn, keep an open mind and continue to learn, pivot if you have to, but never take a step back. And I think if you just kind of think through that mindset, and if all of us with our collective power do that, we hopefully will be sitting here a year from now and we won't be talking about 1.8% anymore. I certainly hope it's a much larger percentage. But again, it starts with us getting our homework done and then, not letting fear stand in the way of us taking that step forward.
And with that, I would like to thank Sarah, Brent and Lael for taking part today and to you for listening.